Hello, gentle students, gentle readers of Hongloumeng, Dream of the Red Chamber. Mycroft has decided here on this day of our conclusion to come and say hello to everyone. He was just napping, but I think he's lamentful that the novel has come to an end and wants to come and be with us as we conclude this lecture series. I also expect him to knock things off of the desk and perhaps break something, but all things have their destiny. Anyway, hello, sweet little Mycroft. Well, there. I do know my cat, don't I? He is very happy. Okay, Mycroft, now I have to talk about the novel. So, well, I think I'd like to end with a few remarks about why study this novel, and especially a few remarks about why study literature as history, and then maybe let you know about what happens at the end, give you a sense of the very ending of the novel itself. Well, now you all don't have the best view of Mycroft, but in any case, here he is joining us. So why did I choose to teach this class? So why do I so often choose to teach a class on this 18th century Chinese novel? And why do I choose to teach it in a way as a means of teaching history? Well, there are two ways to view such a class, two ways to think about this question. One is history is filled with people. History is filled with people. And second, literature describes the people in that history. This reminds me of Aristotle, who said in Ars Poetica, who said, history reveals the details, but literature reveals the universal. That is, somehow the universal message in literature somehow helps us to access reality and people's lives even more than the details of history. I also believe this, literature is one of the core dimensions of the humanities, and I think without a deep commitment to the humanities, to the arts and letters, I think we are, as a human people, doomed to failure. Albert Camus once said, "The purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself." I should repeat that. The purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself. Well, there can be little doubt that Cao Xueqin, the author of Hongloumeng, actually devoted a very large portion of his life to addressing the problems of civilization, focusing on the problems of people. That is what we see throughout the narrative of Hongloumeng. Be careful with your tale. Some of these things are rather rare. So, well, C.T. Xia wrote a book called The Chinese Novel, and I really quite like one of the things that he asserted. Xia wrote that Bao Yu can only temporarily comfort himself, quote, with the illusion of maintaining an oasis of beauty in the deserts of greed and hate. Well, for the world is not like the garden. The world that we live in is not like the garden. Isn't it interesting that China is not the only culture that imagines a utopia in a garden that people who occupy it cannot maintain? Gardens do not protect us from ourselves. We must protect us from ourselves. So before I conclude the class, I think we should, or conclude this series of lectures, we should all pause and remember its author, Cao Xueqin. He writes of himself in his nostalgia studio. Remember at the beginning, he's in his nostalgia studio as he writes his novel. But all through the narrative, there is an almost painful antagonism between not only true and false, but also a nostalgia for this past that he recalls. and what Xia calls a tormented determination to seek liberation from the world of red dust. Well, I should say too at this moment that I hope you're all not being more distracted by dear Mycroft than what I'm saying. I hope my words actually somehow settle. He is a bit, Mycroft is a bit distracting. He does attract some attention. Yes, and you're purring quite loudly. I would also like to acknowledge here that most major universities throughout the planet really offer courses in Hongloumeng. Here in the United States, we have a tremendous amount of courses on the novel Dream of the Red Chamber. When I took these courses, we were assigned, in one course, we were assigned a book on 18th century China, and then we were assigned all 5 of the volumes of David Hawkes' translation of Dream of the Red Chamber. In China, red studies, when you talk about Hongxue red studies, it refers to both communist studies and it also refers to the study of Dream of the Red Chamber. So there are 2 red studies in China. Perhaps the most famous academic journal dedicated to the novel Hongloumeng is a journal called Hongloumeng Xuekan. It's published every 2 months and has really fantastic articles about the novel, about Cao Xueqin, about the history and context of the various chapters in the novel. And one of the most famous so-called redologists is a Chinese gentleman by the name of Zhou Ruchang. I think he died in 2012. He was also an expert, and this is not surprising, in Chinese poetry and in Chinese calligraphy. There are several other great scholars in China, such as Hu Shi and Lu Xun, Cai Yuanpei. These are great scholars who studied the novel Hongloumeng. In the United States, we have Anthony Yu and Andrew Plax, and well, there was Eileen Zhang also, who moved from Shanghai. I think she lived in New York. Well, to conclude, really, I'd like to just summarize some of the major contours of the end of the novel and perhaps read to you the closing passage of the book, and that will conclude our lectures. So in the end of the book, Bao Yu thinks he's marrying Dai Yu, but he actually ends up marrying Bao Chai. And as he's marrying Xue Bao Chai, Lin Dai Yu will die of tuberculosis. Bao Yu will take the exams. He will pass at the very top of the exams. He will reject his future success as a Confucian, and he will become a Taoist. Grandmother Jia will die. She will be buried at the Temple of the Iron Threshold, as concubine Zhao will fall to the ground. She will foam at the mouth, and she will reveal her evil deeds while in a spell, and then she will die. Xifeng will die after seeing Granny Liu. Zhen Baoyu and Jia Baoyu, true Baoyu and false Baoyu, will finally meet in person as if they know each other. And then Jia Baoyu discovers that Zhen Baoyu is a careerist, and that so disgusts Jia Baoyu that he wants to change his own looks so that he doesn't look like Zhen Baoyu. Baoyu is taken to the land of illusion, and he is at last enlightened. Xichun becomes a Buddhist nun. In chapter 118, Baoyu begins to study for the exam. In chapter 119, he passes the exams, and then he disappears into a crowd. The final chapter of the novel, chapter 120, Jiazheng sees a barefooted monk with a shaved head wearing a red cape. And before Jiazheng can get to him, a Taoist monk takes Baoyu away. Well, the end of the novel begins like the beginning of the novel, with Cao Xueqin writing, or the stone writing. They're really the same person. But let me read you the end. This is in the 5th volume. and it's about the final touches on the novel. When I first saw this strange tale of Brother Stone's, I thought it worth publishing as a novel and copied it down for that purpose. But at the time, it was unfinished. The cycle within it was incomplete. There was, in the earlier version, none of the material relating to the Stone's return to the source. I wonder when this rather admirable last installment can have been added. From it, the reader can indeed see that Brother Stone's experience of life sharpened the edge of his spiritual perception and brought him to a more complete awareness of the Tao being the way. At the end, he had no cause for remorse or regret, but with the passing of the years, the characters of this new version of the inscription may wear away and be misread. Well, Mycroft is lamenting the passing of time, I see. He often jumps up here, and when he jumps next to the clock, he wiggles it and stops the pendulum, thus stopping time. I think he, like me, meditates quite often on the passing of time. I had better copy it down again in this complete form and find someone in the world with leisure on his hands to publish it and transmit its message, that things are not as they seem, that the extraordinary and the ordinary, truth and fiction, are all relative to each other. Perhaps my fellow humans whom the dream of life has ensnared may find in this tale an echo, may be summoned back to it by their true home, while free spirits of the high hills may find in the record of Brother Stone's transformations, as in that older tale of the migration of the magic mountain, a reflected light to quicken their own aspirations. So Vanitas. Remember Vanitas? His Chinese name is Kong Kong Daoren, the Taoist who knows that emptiness is empty. So Vanitas copied it all down and, slipping this new version into his sleeve, took it off with him to the luxurious, opulent world of men to seek out a suitable mortal for the task of publication. But all the men he encountered were either too busy establishing themselves in their careers, or else too preoccupied with their day-to-day survival to have the leisure or inclination to prattle with a stone. Then at last, Vanitas came to the little hermitage at Wakeness Ferry by Rushford Hithe, where he found a man asleep, from which he deduced him to be a man of leisure, and thought he would give him the story of the stone to read. But however many times he called out, he could not rouse him from his slumber. Eventually he heaved him up and gave him a good shake, and the man slowly opened his eyes. He skimmed through the book and let it fall from his hands, saying, "I have seen this all myself at first hand. As far as I can see, your record contains no errors. Allow me to tell you of a man who can transmit this story to the world on your behalf, and by doing so, bring this strange affair to a proper conclusion." "Whom do you mean?" asked Vanitas eagerly. "You must wait until the year blank, the blank day of the blank month, and at the blank hour. You must go to a certain nostalgia studio, where you will find a certain Mr. Cao Xueqin. Just tell him, 'Jia Yuzun says, ... and ask him to do such and so forth, ... Yuzun dozed off again, and Vanitas made a careful note of his instructions. Sure enough, after an incalculable number of generations, an infinity of eons, there was indeed a nostalgia studio, and in it a Mr. Cao Xueqin perusing the histories of bygone days. Vanitas did as he had been instructed. He repeated Yuzun's words and handed him the story of the stone to read. This Mr. Cao smiled and said, "Rustic fiction indeed. 家于寸言." "How is it that you know the man, sir? May I deduce from this that you are willing to transmit this tale for him? You are aptly named Vanitas," exclaimed Cao. "You have a nothing in your belly, a very vanity. These may be rustic words, but they contain no careless errors or nonsensical passages. It would be a pleasure to share this with fellow like-minded friends, to help the wind down after a meal, or to while away the solitude of a rainy evening by a lamplit window. No need for some self-important being to commend it or publish it. You and your insistence on ferreting out facts are like the man who dropped his sword in the water and thought to find it again by making a mark on the side of his boat." That passage is from Hanfeize. "You are like a man playing a zither with the tuning pegs glued fast." Vanitas lifted his head and guffawed at this, dropped the manuscript to the ground, and went breezily on his way. As he went, he said to himself, "So it was really all utter nonsense. Author, copyist, and reader were alike in the dark. Just so much ink splashed for fun, a game, a diversion." A later reader of the manuscript added a 4-lined gatha to explain a little on the author's original envoy. "When grief for fiction's idle words, more real than human life appears, reflect that life itself's a dream, and do not mock the reader's tears." Well, gentle readers, gentle students, 祝你们身体健康. And ending with, I think, an apt and well-known phrase, "Vanitas vanitatum, omnia vanitas."